Welcome to a Celtic State of Mind. It's 12:38. This is an impromptu bulletin. I'm Paul John Dykes, and I'm delighted once again to be joined by Alan Morrison. Welcome back to the show, Alan. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm enjoying the festival of football.
No, I know. It's one of these things for me where one of the refreshing parts of that is seeing fans back at the games, obviously. But we'll probably start with the game yesterday, because Colin and I did a wee preview, and this is a very, very much an impromptu bulletin. We go 5 days during the week, and we'll drop a wee extra one either on a Saturday or Sunday, but because it's Father's Day tomorrow, we'll go out just now. And Colin and I did a Football Insomniac preview of the England-Scotland game, and although during that preview I felt that England had a lot of quality that we might struggle with, I did predict a 0-0. Colin predicted a 1-1. And at that time, we didn't know what the team line was. We didn't know that Billy Gilmour was going to start the game. And of course, he was pivotal to that performance last night. What was your thoughts generally about the performance? And what do you think Ange Postecoglou thought of Callum McGregor's performance last night?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, before the game, so I think somebody on Twitter wrote, what have we got that's we can cling on to as hope from as Scotland fans? And I actually put, we squeak a draw and then beat Croatia, and that was really, and where I was coming from on that was both coaches are essentially defensive coaches. Southgate's a defensive coach. Clark is clearly a defensive coach, and I hoped was that Southgate would be overcautious given the resources that he has at his disposal, and that actually Clark, this is a game where he steps up to the mark as a coach. He loves these situations as being the underdog, working out a problem where the other team are overstocked with attacking resources compared to his, and how he sets his team up. So and I think Clark played it excellent. I was a wee bit surprised that Gilmour came in. He's a young kid. He's not a big lad, and to be put into that pivotal central midfield role was a gamble. He stuck with O'Donnell, and fair play to him. He's never let him down. So he made it, and then he put Adams in, and I thought he would keep the energy of Christie, to be honest, but he didn't. And England, Southgate kept his two pivots in central midfield of Rice and Phillips. Now, Phillips had done very well in linking up with the forwards in the game against Croatia, but essentially it was quite a defensive, formation, really. And they surprised with the lack of intensity of their play, the lack of pace they put into the game.
Yeah.
But the one thing I was really pleased about Scotland was they maintained a high line, or not a high line, a sort of mid block, I suppose you'd call it. But they didn't drop. What I'm saying is they didn't drop back too deep. The risk was that as England introduced more pace into the game with Rashford and the world's greatest player came on in the second half, that they would the pace and Scotland would start to drop back and back and back, but they never did. And that's partly because that central midfield was never overrun. So that pressure never got too great, actually.
I mean, before the game, I've been very impressed, like most people, with Calvin Phillips, and I thought that he would be pivotal in orchestrating the pace of the game. I felt that Gilmour was that player last night. He was the guy that was orchestrating the pace. And after the game, obviously having a wee bit of to and fro with people on Twitter, I made the point that for the price of Dykes and Nisbet, we got Bio. And at no point was I saying we should have signed the player. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think someone like, rightly or wrongly, I don't think Nisbet would have been anywhere on our radar whilst he was at East End Park in Dunfermline, Alan. And I say rightly or wrongly because we've picked up players previously from the Pars and they've done very, very well for us in different times. I get that. But, for, I think it was 300 grand, he's gone to Hibs. They've knocked back an offer in January there from Sunderland, I believe. They're probably going to be interested parties this summer. But the point remained, although they do kind of divide opinion, some of these players probably would have done a fairly good job for Celtic. But, it was all about me getting number 9 Dykes on the back of a Celtic jersey for my wee boy. So people don't see the tongue firmly in cheek on Twitter from time to time. But another thing, Callum McGregor, he comes in, and we've seen the pictures of Don Mackay and Ange Postecoglou at the game. And the big question I've been asking, over the last few weeks is who's going to captain this side? Scott Brown. Again, it was interesting to see him doing the punditry. I thought he was very good actually, because
He was loving it, wasn't he?
He was loving it. Yeah, he was loving it alongside Gary Neville. And it's always strange to see Bruni with the hair. It just doesn't look right. But obviously he's left the building. I can't quite get used to him in an Aberdeen jersey. But the big question is, who's going to take the captain's armband? We know that the vice captain's McGregor. He's one of these players, Alan, who leads by example, isn't he? And I think, if that's the first time Postecoglou has seen him in the flesh, and I believe it is, he would have been impressed last night, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I mean, what astonished me when I reflected back on the game and I was watching the ITV coverage was that I don't recall the commentators mentioning McGregor's name once. I mean, Gilmour is now slotted behind Grealish as the second greatest player in the world, but he was great. The wee lad was absolutely terrific. But I think I've got a site that I use that will give me some of the match data, and I'm really looking forward to tomorrow on Twitter comparing Gilmour and McGregor. Not because I'm wanting to say one's better than the other. I just think that probably McGregor was equally as effective as Gilmour, but in a much more understated way. And what was fascinating for me about Callum McGregor's performance was just the role that he was asked to play. So a couple of things that, around that whole midfield setup would be, having a debate with Duco James on Twitter about, John McGinn. Now, I think I've said to you before, in the time that I've been doing Celtic by numbers, one of the things I wanted to do was look at players in the SPFL that I think, they look like they could be Celtic type of players, quality, and do a bit of a scouting deep dive into them. And in 5-6 years, I've only done that on one player, and that was John McGinn. And I would have signed John McGinn to replace Scott Brown as a deeper line player. And if you look at John McGinn's data in terms of his English Premier League, because he plays a little bit further forward for Aston Villa, he's not actually that creative. His scoring output, his expected goals is not actually that high. I do think, although he's got some great attributes to play in a forward area, I mean, he's got the best strong arse that we've seen in a Scottish player since Kenny Dalglish.
It's just Kenny, yeah,
absolutely fantastic. His ability to shield the ball and turn in advanced places under high pressure. I do think he's actually better suited to that deeper role, but he scored 9 goals for Scotland, so who am I to argue with Steve Clarke? But what that meant was that you've then got McGregor playing that more deeper pivot role with wee Gilmour. Now we've talked about Celtic obviously over the last couple of years, the fact that one of the collateral damages of playing an increasingly immobile Scott Brown has been that McGregor has had to kind of change his game, and you can see him in many games hanging around the edge of the box in front of the centre backs, trying to snuff out fires, and that's just not his game. But you put him in a structure that's organised, you put him in front of 3 big centre halves, and he's not necessarily having to fly around into tackles. He's actually there to pick up bits and pieces, break up the play in a more general way, but be the first receiver and then start the play. He was absolutely fantastic in that, in a high pressure, high intensity game. And that actually gave me pause for thought that really, do you need to replace Brown with a traditional 6 hard tackling kind of player, or could you actually have a player like McGregor who's in there, and it's providing he's got sufficient screen behind him and he's not expected to do the sort of first contact defensively. He's there to pick up the seconds and then build the play. That's exactly what he did really well last night. So I think there's some food for thought there.
I think so. For me, I'm far more simplistic. I love the fact that you can bring the facts to the table, if you like, the figures to the table. And I'm an observer when it comes to football. And I think that as an observer last night, if Ange was watching what everybody else was watching, he's probably looking at McGregor and agreeing with exactly what you've said there. That's the area of the pitch that he's going to be effective on. Do you think he's a shoo-in for the captaincy as well, Alan?
So I'm not one of these that gets too excited about that. I appreciate the symbolism of it. I kind of would favour a sort of European model of having a group of captains. So a lot of European dressing rooms have senior players, maybe 5 or 6 senior players, and then it's their role to effectively be almost like the prefects. they're the sort of gateway to the manager, and they're the ones that keep good order but keep good morale. I think it's too much for one individual. You've got a squad of 25 players. I think you need 5 or 6 senior individuals that effectively can perform that role. Who actually symbolically wears the armband is to me is not as important as are there individuals in that dressing room who are not enforcing but ensuring stamping out anything early that looks like it could be disrupt the rhythm of the team or the morale of the team, etc. So you would, to me, you'd look at players like Julian, McGregor, even Forrest, really, as players that should be fulfilling that kind of role in the dressing room. As I say, who actually wears the armband? I'm not personally too fussed, but I know it's symbolically important.
Yeah, it's symbolic to Celtic with our heritage and our traditions, and we love the history and that as well, Alan. But I remember having a similar conversation with Paul Elliott not too long ago, probably about a year ago now, actually, because it was only an audio podcast. And he said something pretty similar, when I was speaking about the captaincy at the time that he was at the club. I referred to a comment that the late Billy McNeill made in one of his books, where he said that he regrets not giving the captaincy to Paul Elliott, and he felt that that might have taken a wee bit of the burden off Paul McStay, who was carrying the team very much at that time. And Elliott said, Paul, I went about my business like I was a captain. And the armband, whether it was on my arm or not, didn't matter. I went about my business and conducted myself like a captain in the dressing room, on a training pitch, and during the games. And I think when you watch the performances, if you were to pick out a captain, let's say League Cup final 1990, you would have picked out Paul Elliott, wouldn't you? Because of his performance and his leadership ability. Another thing I was really impressed about last night was, and I know that Stephen O'Donnell started his career at Celtic, as did Declan Gallagher, as did Andy Robertson, who are all part of that squad, was that following the game against the Czech Republic, Alan, he was the target. He was a guy everybody seemed to go for. And you see it on social media, you've seen it in the press. He was getting criticised left, right and centre. And Steve Clarke came out leading up to the England game, and he defended his player. To the hilt, he defended his player. And what happened last night is Stephen O'Donnell went out and had the game of his life, probably, right? He was a standout, wasn't he? And I just thought to myself, man management, old-fashioned man management at its very, very best. And I don't think we've had that over the last year and a half or so. I think Celtic have lacked a bit of man management, where you can focus on a player and get the best out of him. Were you impressed with that last night? I know a lot of that onus is on the player himself to stand up to the plate, but a big part of that, I think, is down to the gaffer.
No, agreed. And I think O'Donnell came out after the game and thanked his manager for standing by him. And yeah, absolutely great piece of man management. And he did, but he did his job, because in a single game. And listen, we've seen this with Wales, Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, teams that play in a very similar way, a similar footballing heritage and style. You overachieve in tournaments because players like O'Donnell and similar can actually step up, and the better players in their squad can drag them up to that level, which frankly didn't happen against the Czech Republic. If you look at that game, which was, it really came down, it was a 50-50 game, and their striker, who cost Roma 40 million quid a few years ago and scored 13 goals for a leading Bundesliga club, scored 2 excellent goals, and his first goal, his header, was a fantastic finish, by the way, but it kind of got forgotten in the drama with the second goal. Whereas Scotland's striker, scored 13 goals for Queen's Park Rangers in the Championship and cost 2 million. Yeah. Those differences are what you get at international level. And if Scotland are going to do well in the tournament, then Dykes has got to perform like shtick. He's a £40 million striker in the Bundesliga. He's got, at some point, he's got to produce moments that caliber of player would produce, and that's the only way that a team like Scotland can perform. But I thought Wales was quite interesting, yeah, because Kiefer Moore, they've got leading their line, is an excellent proxy for Lyndon Dykes. Big lump of a striker, completely immobile, plays for a middling English Championship side, and we've seen from players that have gone up and down from Scotland and England that the English Championship is not that much different to the sort of middle to the top of the Scottish Premier League. That's the sort of strike level that you're talking about. But you put Dan James of Man United, Gareth Bale of Real Madrid, and Ramsey of Juventus behind Moore, and he suddenly becomes a really good player. Surprise, surprise. So this is where I think Scotland against Croatia are going to have to find a way to get more support up to Dykes in an attacking sense. Get McGinn a bit closer, get McGregor a bit closer, get these. We've got to give him the best chance of turning into shtick. When
I look at that, it's probably something that I've been going on about for quite some time, because I lament the fact that Celtic haven't been producing the strikers, Alan, and we had a podcast some time ago where the question was raised, when was our last great goal scorer that we produced, that came through? And we were talking about, obviously, Charlie Nick in the 1980s, then into the 90s we had, people are going to say, well, you can't compare Jerry Craney, but Craney came through the ranks, he scored goals, and he played in a really, really poor Celtic side. And then after that, it's really, really difficult to...
Burchill, maybe, a little bit for a while.
Yeah, and a few...
Yeah, no, I remember. Sorry, Paul. I remember this. This is a question that gets revisited, and it's something I looked at. Me. I then went back and did all the names. I have to dig that out now. Sorry, I haven't got it to hand. But yeah, you're absolutely spot on. And actually, it was a shockingly poor return in terms of producing.
Yeah, it really was. And some people came in to say, well, Sean Maloney, but I don't think Maloney ever, although he did play up front as a youth, I don't think that's where we utilised them, in the first team. So although he did, chip in with quite a few goals, as has James Forrest, he wasn't an out-and-out striker. No. And I think that really has been kind of like a feature of Scottish football, not just Celtic. But you think back, and I did have last week the absolute honour of interviewing Brian McClare for a future show that will be coming to your screens on our YouTube channel at some point in the not too distant. And Brian's brilliant. If you've ever watched any of the interviews that he gives.
Very dry, sense of humour.
We did a live gig, Alan, a wee while back. It was Kevin and I in McCool's in Glasgow, and Brian McClare was unbelievable. And Kevin dug himself a wee hole, and McClare wouldn't let him forget it. It was great. Watch it, it's on YouTube. And I was having this discussion with him, and I said, around about the 1986 World Cup, where we went with, for me, a squad, when you look back, that was just, in terms of the strength of that squad, it was unbelievable when you compare it to some of the squads we've had since. And I was talking to Chalky, because at that point, at the World Cup in 86, he had not been capped by Scotland. He was a youth internationalist. He'd done the under-18s, I think it was, and he'd played with Paul McStay and all that, whilst he was with Motherwell. Brian McClare, that is. But the World Cup squad, when you look at it, Charlie Nicholas, who was at Arsenal by that stage, Stevie Archibald, Barcelona. McClare hadn't yet made his debut for Scotland. He was to make it later on in 86. He was banging the goals in for Celtic. McCoist didn't make the cut, but he obviously was very, very prolific with Rangers. Frank McAvenny, who was one of the top goal scorers in English football with West Ham. You've then got Maurice Johnston, who was coming into his own at Celtic as well. Kenny Dalglish, who was left behind because he fell out with Fergie. And then you had other strikers like David Speedy, Graham Sharp, guys who were playing at a good level down south. Yeah. A whole host, over half a dozen strikers back then. And then I think it's the part of the squad, and it's a part of the Scotland team, that, as you say, when you're looking for a wee bit of that stardust, someone just to produce that wee bit of magic, we might be looking a wee bit further back. We might be looking at someone like John McGinn to pull that one out, or maybe even a long range effort from Stuart Armstrong, or maybe even from an unlikely source, because it was almost O'Donnell last night. When we're looking at the post-mortem of this tournament, and let's hope it's not after the next game. Let's hope that we've got at least another 2 games. Do you think that'll be the key issue? We didn't have that, that stardust up front.
Possibly. I mean, you've just made me absolutely depressed reading off all those names. That probably between them, a lot of those players didn't get very many caps, and what you do with them today. But what I will say is, just remember the last time Scotland beat England at Wembley, Don Hutchinson scored the winner, and Billy Dodds was up front. So there's always hope. So whilst I don't know. It's probably a thesis. There's probably a thesis to be written on why we're not producing anything like those players today as a nation. Can Scotland win a game at the Euros without having a player of that calibre up front? The simple answer is yes. I mean, modern football is very different now. The player up front, especially Dykes, is there to do many facets of a job, not just score goals. You've got 2 wide positions. You often have a 10, and even the breaking midfielders. So players like McGregor, Armstrong, Christie, McGinn. These are all capable of scoring goals. So I wouldn't worry that it isn't Dykes that's scoring. And Che Adams is I think it looks. I'm still not quite sure what he is, but my goodness, he works hard. Crikey,
He was impressive again. Yeah.
What really impressed me was the space he found in the sort of half spaces, the 10 space, I guess you'd call it, just in front of the defence. I don't know where Rice and Phillips were, but the number of times that he got the ball on the turn and was able to then go forward was impressive in terms of his movement. So I think he's good for a goal as well. So I think I wouldn't worry that Dykes isn't isn't the best. I think he does a job and he disrupts the defence and he occupies people. But I think against Croatia, who Croatia's going to be is one of those teams that I think will suit Scotland in that they've not got an abundance of pace. They're not going to be running past. I know Perisic is still pretty nifty, but in general they're not going to be running past you. They're quite a ponderous team. They're a team that is because of the size of the nation. Although Croatia have had some absolutely fantastic players over the years, and they had a good generation that got to the World Cup final, obviously. But Rakitic is gone, Mandzukic is gone, Modric is 35. Perisic is in his 30s now. The defence is a little bit creaky. So we if we give it a go, I think, and we need to be a little bit 10 yards further up the pitch and get those players that I mentioned in the midfield nearer the goal. Then I think we've got a decent chance.
Yeah, well, here's hoping. And we did mention that Ange Postecoglou not only is in the country, he was at the game last night with Dominic Mackay.
Oh, you wouldn't know it if there weren't photographs on social media. You wouldn't know it from Celtic, would you? I mean, they've not said a word about when he's officially in the building. I mean, it's just come work with us here, please.
Yep. I've yet to watch it, but I think there's a Celtic View podcast with Paul Cuddihy that might have dropped yesterday with Ange Postecoglou. But as you say, you're not sure by listening to that if it's a dial-in from any part of the world. Who knows? But let's have a wee chat about the arrival. Let's talk about we're entering the age of Ange, to steal the great title from that wee documentary that's online. It could well be the age of angst, or are we departing the age of angst? Let's hope so, Alan. Let's try and paint a positive on that one. And we're entering a wee bit of the unknown, and I think that sometimes the fear factor is why people start to throw things and say, well, you're being negative. Well, I guess that it is the fear of the unknown. We're entering an era with Ange Postecoglou, and what I'm hoping to get from yourself is, let's have a look at what are going to be the strengths and weaknesses of Ange. Which players are going to come to the fore? I mean, did we see one last night who's going to return to the form that we knew and loved him for, maybe under Brendan Rodgers with Callum McGregor? And one of the things we tried to do is we spoke to Jared from Celts Down Under to give us the Australian kind of aspect of that. And then we got a perspective from Japanese football, and we spoke to Dan from the Japan Times. But we have spoken to yourself, Alan, over the last couple of years, Celtic by Numbers. You're now involved with the Huddle Breakdown. Tell us your thoughts, your fears, and what you're looking forward to with Ange coming in.
Yeah. So I'll say first up that I think what Celtic are getting is a very experienced manager, right? So putting aside all the noise and the issues around nationality and where he's coached, this is a very experienced, not just a manager, but actually someone who seems to be a leader in any sort of club that he joins. And when by leader, I mean invests not just in the running of the team on the park, but actually in the culture of the organisation. So I don't actually have any fears in terms of the man's ability to organise a football team. I think he's proven himself in different environments, under different circumstances, under different duress, whether it be language, country, the state of the club that he's taken over, expectations, whatever it's been. He produces winning sides. So I don't have any fears. What I fear is, if you think about the whole context of how he was hired, what organisation goes from thinking that the answer is Roy Keane to Eddie Howe to Postecoglou? What thinking is it that was driving the fact? Now, Celtic may land on an absolute, genius but I fear it's, if we do, it's by luck, not through having a thought out strategic approach that landed at Postecoglou, because he was the answer to the questions that Celtic posed in terms of how do we move the club forward. Now, can Postecoglou move the club forward? Yes, he can. Have I got any confidence that he will be given the backing and the structure and the organisation that goes on behind that to optimise and give him every chance to succeed? I don't have that confidence. So I don't have any fear about him individually. The guy improves football teams. If you look at Yokohama Marinos, every year that he's been there, their expected goals has gone up. Their expected goals conceded has remained about the same, and that will come to the sort of tactical element in a bit, but his expected goals have gone up. He's improved every single team that he's taken on. That Australia team that he took to the World Cup was a bit where like Croatia are now. They've got the horrible phrase, the overused phrase of golden generation of players, but the age of Kuhl and Viduka, Bresciano and all those people. Australia were a decent international football team, and all those players were coming to the end of their time, and he ruthlessly got rid of them, and he scoured the planet. So this is a guy who hard work and a work ethic and identification of players, I think, is something that he's proven that he can do. Now, he's also come from a background at the City Group under Yokohama Marinos, where there's a large infrastructure of data scouting network to support him as a manager, and he'll be used to that, and he clearly uses that, and I'm hoping that Celtic will support him in that regard. A very telling comment he made in an interview that I saw with him, because like a lot of people, I've been immersing myself in interviews and articles and all this sort of thing, was after a particularly bad defeat, he was asking, what did you say in the dressing room? And he didn't. He said, I don't say anything, because I go back, I watch the game, I reflect, I think about the performance, not the result, and I think, what was it I asked the players to do? What did they actually do? And if they did what I asked them to do, and we ended up losing the game, that's okay. That's okay from a performance. So it's all about performance. Now, I love that. That to me is intellectually, the way my brain works, that was the right way to approach it. But it may lead to some short term and the occasional disappointment, I suppose. But as I say, long story short, the risks to me are all external to him individually. I think he's incredibly experienced and looks an incredibly interesting and thoughtful and intelligent guy.
You touched on a point there that I guess is one of my biggest concerns, is that as far as we are aware and from the information that we have, Celtic were obviously speaking to a number of candidates for this job. But my biggest concern is that what we've got, and I don't just mean the individual, but I mean the whole structure of the appointment, is different from the structure of the appointment that Eddie Howe was going to be, because obviously the club were at pains to stress that Eddie Howe was bringing his entire team, including a director of football. And I mean, they stressed that on 2 occasions when the announcement was made that he wasn't coming to Celtic. All of a sudden, we've got something completely different. And I think that when they were interested in Roy Keane and they interviewed Roy Keane and they interviewed Nicky Butt, they were going for a different approach again, Alan, because I think that approach was very much like, Roy Keane was going to be the figurehead of that partnership, but a lot of the groundwork and at the coalface was going to be Nicky Butt, and obviously he has gathered that experience whilst at Manchester United over a number of years as a coach. And then all of a sudden, and of course there was the Harkin and Maresca team that had been mooted as well. Maresca left for Parma during our negotiations with Eddie Howe, and then all of a sudden Ange Postecoglou. And I think that was my biggest concern, and you've touched on it there. But when you were talking, the one name that keeps coming into my head in relation to the approach, and in particular the post-match approach, is Wim Jansen. And I've had the pleasure, and again, it's not name dropping, talking about Wim Jansen to a number of the players that played underneath him. And a lot of those players were surprised that after a game, particularly after a defeat or a poor performance, Wim Jansen was not interested in having a post-mortem in the dressing room. And they would speak about it at the first day of training on Monday. So when you're talking about that has put me in mind of Wim Jansen. Wim Jansen, there was a bedding in period, but it wasn't a full season. It was a ropey couple of weeks. And I think that when you look at the entire season in detail, and Jim Orr has done so because he studied that season in depth when he was working on his Bratback play, Bend It Like Bratback. You look at a moment where Tosh McKinlay and Henrik Larsson eventually actually come to blows at Barrowfield. And having spoken to Tosh about that, and Tosh to this day says it really did affect his Celtic career, that moment where he's broken Henrik Larsson's nose on a training pitch. He says that was the culmination of a lot of frustrations and tensions within the dressing room since Wim Jansen came in and since we had a whole new group of players who had come to the club. He says there were cliques had gathered. There was the Scottish lads, and then there was the Scandinavian lads, and then there was a coming together where Tosh has stuck the head in Henrik. But apparently, from what I understand, after that cleared the air. That cleared the air, and from there, when you look at it, we had a game against Rangers coming up. It was a famous 1-0 game with Richard Gough claiming that he was raising the roof, but he was actually raising 10 fingers to everybody who was at the game. But we went on, and as you say, everybody knows what happened that season. Is it going to be a similar kind of similar situation? I've read a lot about how Ange takes a while in season one, and it's the sophomore season that you really see him stamp his authority on it. Are we ready as Celtic fans to give him that time?
Yeah, no, and this is something which he himself picked up on in a kind of wide-ranging interview that probably a lot of people have seen now, where he says, look, it's going to take time, and he mentions it can take months to get his ideas across. But if you look at him tactically and what is it that he's trying to do, I think the reason for that is more about the style of play that he wants to play. I don't think he's going to be hung up on a particular formation. If you look at his Marinos team, it varies depending on the game situation, and it can vary match to match. Although it looks like a 4-2-3-1 basic shape, I'm not going to suggest he comes in and plays a 4-2-3-1 if he doesn't feel that he's got the players to do that. I think the approach will be the approach, and I think that's what he brings. He brings an approach to play which is around the attacking intensity, the pressing intensity from the front, and playing a very high line defensively and being quite compact, having wingers drop in, but actually playing a very similar way to what the Rangers played over the last two seasons. That 4-3-3 in defence is very compact and very narrow and quite high. And essentially you use the touchline as a marker, right? If you squeeze the space, you can actually tuck in quite far and still restrict space. So I think we're going to see quite some similarities there, but a bit in that sense. But I think the important thing will be how long it takes to get those ideas over in terms of how the team plays. That will be what takes the time. Now, the thing that takes the time from a coaching perspective is always attacking patterns, right? So Postecoglou is a coach who focuses a great deal on attack. There's a quote which got me a bit worried from an analysis site that was looking at Marino's games, saying each and every team Marinos have faced try to exploit the high line by overloading it, but Postecoglou does not seem bothered in rectifying it. So right. I think there's going to be some frustrations in that sense, in that we're going to see perhaps teams exploiting Celtic in a similar way. Whether that means with a high line and a narrow, it means overloading the wide areas, and then you suddenly got players breaking in behind. But what I would say is, if you look at his experience in Japan, and there's been a lot of discussion about the relative merits of the Japanese league versus the SPFL. Well, if you look at it objectively, and you look at one of these ELO type rating sites, there's one football database, one that uses a very similar ranking system to what ELO does. ELO is a very well established ranking framework for ranking sports teams that came out of America, and you can look at ELO rankings for all football teams as well. Soccer database, if you rank the Japanese teams in the J League and the Scottish SPFL, is every single team in that J League will rank higher than every single SPFL team apart from the top two. Okay, right. So he's going to be playing teams that are inferior, right, to the teams he's used to coming up against in the J League. So in terms of how long will it take, how many times against Ross County, St Mirren, those kind of calibre of sides, he's there's a famous game famous. I say famous. It wasn't famous. It was famous in the sense of it pinpointed some of the weaknesses of how Lennon set up his team. There's a game against Dundee United at home. And I think Celtic won it in the end, maybe 1-0. But the point was that Dundee United, who were actually a reasonably well-managed team, exploited Celtic's weaknesses with Laxalt bombing on, Duffy, Brown being unable to cover, time and time again, and they missed chance after chance. Mm-hmm. And this is what will happen. But the chances are that in the SPFL, not only will Celtic be better organised than they were under Lennon, and you won't get these areas of weakness like we got down the left side, where you've got Duffy, who's positionally ill-disciplined and used to playing in a deep line defence with lots of cover. You've got a Brown who's completely immobile, and you've got Laxalt who's bombing up here, there, and everywhere. And suddenly you've got a massive amount of space. I think Celtic will be better organised than that because Postecoglou is a better coach.
Yeah.
But also the risk is reduced in that for 80% of the games that Celtic are going to play in the SPFL, they're not going to have players good enough to exploit those weaknesses that Celtic are going to have as Postecoglou beds in his his thinking. So I would have massive fears about Europe, obviously, but I would like to think that because of what the standard of footballer he's used to coaching environment, that he would be able to bed in the FPL reasonably quickly.
I do have concerns. Obviously, we've seen the draw during the week there, Alan. I've got concerns for the first game against Midfield because of the the turn rate, the ins and outs at Celtic Park at the moment is furious. That door will be spinning, and I look at the lack of width that we had all season, and we at the moment haven't strengthened in these areas. I look at the wafer thin defensive performances last season, and we're probably going to be weaker on account of what Chris Ayer has said about his future. And these are my biggest concerns. And of course, you've then got the goalkeeper situation that was a concern all season, and then the striker scenario where we've gone, I think, from 4 strikers to 2 on the books at the moment, although there's a question mark around Lee Griffiths and whether or not Ange wants to make that decision himself. When you're looking then at the width, if that is a feature of maybe some of the teams and the shapes that Ange has had previously, I look at the right-hand side. Jamesy Forrest has come back in, and we missed him dreadfully last season. We really did. Behind him, you've got Marian Sved and Karamoko Dembele, who between them haven't had a lot of football for Celtic. I would have loved Dembele to get a wee bit more game time last season, and then we'd probably be looking at him as a surefire second choice in that position this time round. He might still be due to the nature of the makeup of that squad. But on the left-hand side, I've got massive doubts that we've got enough bodies over there. Mikey Johnson, of course, started coming back into the team, Alan, but I don't think for £5 million we're going to take the option on El Yunusi. As much as I like certain aspects of his play, Alan, I don't think that's the kind of route we're going to go down. And then similarly at the back, centre-half. Who's going to be centre-half against Midtjylland? Is it going to be Welsh and Beaton? Do you share similar concerns on a personnel level for Ange coming in and what he's got to work with?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's the squad mismanagement is just appalling and beyond belief. And where we are, we're absolutely threadbare, and key positions are clearly lacking. What can we expect from Postecoglou? I mean, he's never really been in an environment where he's had money to buy players. In Japan, it tends to be a trading environment. Obviously, Australia, with a salary cap, you're always working to really jiggle around what you can fit in within your salary cap. And obviously, with Australia, you pick what you get. But what you've seen from Postecoglou is a very thorough approach to recruitment, and he will find players who not only will fit in terms of the style of play he wants to adopt, but will fit in culturally into what he's trying to do with the team. And I think that's going to be as important as if you look at every appointment that he's had, one of the first things he's done is get rid of players that would probably be viewed as the highest profile, biggest earning names, if you like. I wouldn't be surprised if we sign a lot of players that we've never heard of.
Yeah.
But I would be delighted by that, not because of some hipster thing, although I'm sure I'll stick my hand up to that occasionally as well. It's more because someone's done some thorough research and identified someone that can do the job that is expected of them, and he's got the evidence and the scouting reports and the data behind it that will evidence that, and they've been thorough enough to know that this person will fit into the culture and into the way of working that he wants. So I think that's what it's going to come down to, because he's clearly no respecter of reputation, no respecter of salary or past achievement. And I think we should be pleased about that, because that is true leadership. That is how you drive improvement, and that's how you drive culture. One of the things I would be a little bit worried about would be the sort of Dyla scenario where you've got a coach that comes in and you've got, let's call it an RC set of senior players who think they know best or are suitably well remunerated, that they feel that they can have a big say in how the club should be run. Now, I look around the Celtic dressing room, I'm not sure we've got like a Mulgrew and a Commons and a, dare I say it, Scott Brown, who's going to be disruptive to a manager in that way. To me, McGregor, Forrest, Julian look like consummate professionals. So, but even if I think if he picked up on that, they'd be out the door, frankly. As we touched on the players that we think are going to leave, Ayer has been very open and honest, I think, and said that he wants to leave, and good luck to the guy. I wish he would stay. Christie's got no interest in signing an extended contract, so we've got to assume he wants away. And obviously, Incham didn't want to be there last season, so I doubt that's changed. And Edouard, obviously, at the stage of his career, and he's such a talent, it only makes sense for him to be moving on at this stage. So I would imagine that Postecoglou will be encouraging the club to get rid of those players as quickly as possible, and then be getting in players that actually want to buy in. So if you think about, what have we got left, and who do we think is actually going to benefit from Postecoglou being in there? So I went through the team that we've got left, and who's going to sort of I think benefit from Postecoglou. I mean, it's probably a little bit lazy, but you'd think that Barkas, Postecoglou is going to be sympathetic to the man's personal situation as being a Greek immigrant in a new country, sort of struggled to really adapt and to join in. But actually, Barkas is the best passer of all the goalkeepers, 88% passing in terms of that, and he's a mobile goalkeeper. He's light on his feet. He's not a big heavy man. So you'd think he may fit into Postecoglou's style in terms of having a goalkeeper play quite high and also be starting passing moves. I think Bolingoli would potentially get a bit of a chance under Postecoglou, because again, Bolingoli is an athletic player who'll get up and down the left side. He's strong running, but I think his lack of creativity ultimately will perhaps limit it this time. But I think he'll get a chance. I think Welsh will get a chance. Welsh, is relatively mobile. He's also, what improved over the season as he was in the team last season was his passing. And again, that starting moves from the back, because what you're going to see under Postecoglou isn't a million miles away from how Rodgers wanted Celtic to play and how Rodgers got Celtic playing in his first season. Now, the intensity and the pressing dropped off massively in season 2, but in that first season, Celtic, Marino's averaged 63% possession, Celtic averaged 63% possession. Rodgers was about 700 odd passes a game from his team. Marino's around 700 passes. Rodgers was big on intensity from the front, and that's exactly how Postecoglou wants to go. So there's going to be players in that squad. This isn't going to be a huge step away from how they played under Rodgers. I think the one of the differences will be that high line. So with Welsh, you're going to need a bit of pace at the back in terms of recovery speed. I think Bitton could get a chance. I'm not saying, again, I've been very vocal about not playing Bitton at centre half, but again, just from his deep passing, there's nobody better in the club at progressing the ball from deep positions. Sorrow's got to get a chance, because one of Sorrow's sort of superpowers is his vertical. He's always playing vertically. He never plays horizontally. He's always looking to go forward. He's always either running with the ball, passing the ball forward, and he's got behind Christie. He's the midfielder with the most ball regains in the final third per 90 minutes. So not only does he sit as a 6, he actually can press high and win the ball back in the final third. I think McGregor will suit Postecoglou's style, because I think McGregor's just a very intelligent footballer, and frankly, he'll fit in with anything that you tell him to do, because he's that kind of player. And obviously Rogic, again, Postecoglou knows Rogic. He picked him for Australia. He's clearly going to be revitalised by having a manager who knows him and trusts him there. Forrest is, people don't talk about Forrest's defensive contribution, but Forrest can do a good job as a wing back. He gets up and back, and obviously he's quick and direct. And then the last one I think would benefit potentially would be Ajeti, because Ajeti again is actually quite an aggressive player in transition. Ajeti gives, I haven't got the stat to hand, but he gives away more fouls than you'd think. He's absolutely prolific for giving fouls away. But also he tops the strikers for winning the ball back in the final third. In fact, of all the strikers, he wins the ball back in the final third more than any of the others. But also, I think with Ajeti, what you'll see with Postecoglou's team is, one of the things I actually admire about the way that the Rangers play is they don't just lump the ball into the box. They recycle it, and they only put it in the box when it's optimal and they think they've got a good chance of connecting or someone's made a good run. And that's what you'll see under Postecoglou. The ball will not be lumped into the box like Lennon. Get it in the box, get it to the middle and then take a shot. It's going to be more patient than that, and it's going to be, let's wait for the right opportunity. And you need a player like Ajeti whose movement is really good in that penalty area and who's an excellent finisher. It's very synonymous with the way that Man City play under Guardiola. Patient. And how many goals do Man City score where the finisher is in the 6-yard box? Sterling is an awful striker of the football. His technique at actually striking the football is really poor, and he's now a player that scores 20 plus goals a season because most of them are from 6 yards out. Forrest will love this. Forrest will love being on the end of these sort of back post runs. Ajeti will love making runs across the centre backs. So I think those players will benefit. And then the ones that I think will struggle, possibly Julian, because he clearly lacks pace, and for having a player like Julian playing high without an Ayer beside him is going to be very risky. But then look at the way, I would say the best proxy, if Celtic fans want to think about how is Postecoglou's team going to play, a good proxy in all of our minds at the moment would be Italy, right? I'm not saying that Celtic are as good as Italy, and I'm not saying that Postecoglou is a manager who's as talented as Mancini. I'm not saying that. I'm just using it as a proxy for the style and approach. The way that Italy play is very similar to the way that Postecoglou will have Celtic playing. And they have Chiellini and Bonucci, who are both pretty slow anchoring that defence. Now, they are great players. They're great defenders. And I suspect their positioning and their know-how and their anticipation are top class. And Julien is a good defender. We don't talk about it enough, the extent to which Julien's presence last season was missed. He was, to me, the biggest single miss of the season.
It's going back to that game you mentioned earlier, Alan, isn't it? The Dundee United game, where he's collided with the post,
Yes, that was the one, And then I think other players that may struggle, I think Taylor, just because I like Greg Taylor because he's got a fantastic attitude. I don't think he'll leave because I think Taylor has fantastic utility against the lower SPFL sides. His creativity is actually fantastic, against poor teams. Against good teams, he simply doesn't have the pace or the power to impose himself. And in Postecoglou's system, getting up and down like that could be beyond him. But I think he's got a great attitude, Taylor, and I'm sure he'll be around the squad. Turnbull will be an interesting one. Turnbull's not your sort of all action. Christie. It's a shame Christie's leaving because Christie would be perfect for a Postecoglou team. Turnbull, obviously, he doesn't quite have that same pace, doesn't quite have that same aggression. Rogic may well be preferred in that 10 role. I don't see Turnbull being an 8 in Postecoglou's system, so that's going to be an interesting one. And then finally, Griffiths. Again, Griffiths, he's not going to want a striker that drops deep and pings in shots from 35 yards. Griffiths didn't win the ball back in the final third at all in any game last season, not once. And if you compare that to Ajeti and El Younousi is another Postecoglou player because he can play inverted. His pressing is fantastic. His aggression, his closing down is fantastic. He would actually be a really good signing under Postecoglou. So those were my thoughts in terms of who I think might do well and who may struggle actually to adapt to his ways.
It's really useful, very useful. Couple of surprises in there, Alan. And again, if Turnbull can become part of the team, fantastic. A wee bit of regret on the El Younousi front because if he's going to be, suited to the way that Ange Postecoglou plays, I think he could be a revelation, but it might be too late in the day for that. But there's a lot of names there that, I think that a lot of Celtic fans have maybe written off, but you're looking at the fact that they could form part of this jigsaw.
He won't care.
And that's positive.
Care about that. He won't care about that, right? He will go into that dressing room and say, "Are you with me? This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. Are you with me?" And if he sees that they're with you on the training ground, he's going to give them a chance.
Yeah.
He went through dozens and dozens of players for Australia before settling on a team that actually won the Asian Cup, and then he qualified them for the next World Cup. And that's a really important story as well, because he walked away. He walked away from a team. He could have taken a team to another World Cup. Imagine being a manager at a World Cup, the exposure that gives you, the kudos that gives you. He walked away from that because his ambition, what he wanted to achieve with the team, was not matched by his bosses, and that is the biggest fear that I have. Because if Celtic do not support him, and I don't mean by spending millions and millions of pounds on players, I mean by having the right staff, the right type of player, and the right support structures in the background in terms of conditioning, physical fitness, recovery, all of those things. If they're not how he wants them and not everyone's on the same page, he will walk away.
That is a concern. Two things that you've said, and we'll cover them just before we finish off. I remember Stephen Welsh coming into the side, and I spoke to a very highly regarded coach here in the Lothians who had seen a lot of him as a youth player, and he said, just wait till he starts passing the ball. And what he did say was his long range passing was excellent. Now, I've not seen the figures, Alan. You touched on it a bit yourself. How has he progressed in terms of his distribution?
Yeah, I'm just sorry. I'm now looking at spreadsheets, anticipating that question. So yeah, I mean, 68, just over 68 passes per 90 minutes. I mean, you're really actually looking. He completed more passes than any other player. I didn't realise that. I didn't know that. I'm surprised myself, even more than Bitton. In terms of passing per 90 minutes, he completed more than any other player. Now, I think there's a little bit of teams saw him get into the side. They saw that perhaps physically he's not the biggest, and they actually thought, "Oh, we'll let this kid have the ball because he's just a kid," and that actually, wasn't a good idea because he did mature into being. So there's a little bit of we'll let him have the ball, and therefore there's a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. But actually, he completed more passes per 90 minute than any other player. If you look at his packing passes, well, these are passes that are synonymous with taking players out of the game. He's on 11 packing passes a game. Only Callum McGregor has got more passes, packing passes per 90 minutes. So that gives you some indication that not only is he an accurate passer of the ball, as your coach said, his long passing is passing through the lines. Actually developed massively as the season went on. So that aspect of it to me, and the fact that I know he's not very big, but in all honesty, if you've got a team that's playing a really high line, you're going to have less concern about heading balls away on your 18-yard box and more concern about mobility and being able to defend on the turn sometimes. Which Welsh, he's not massively quick, but he's relatively nimble compared to Julian, especially. So I think he'll get a chance, definitely.
Yeah, it's a conversation I have regularly with Colin Watt, because I do think that he's done enough to be in and about that first team as a regular. I still think we need to strengthen, obviously, in that area. So that's very positive to hear that.
Yeah.
The other thing, you mentioned a few players, in Cham, Christie, Ayer, Edouard. One of the biggest issues I have with those four players leaving is the asset value and how that's dropped in the last 12 months, Alan. I mean, we're talking tens of millions potentially, aren't we?
Yeah. And the strategy whereby of appeasement or whatever it was, or whether it was, we don't know, right? I mean, listen, the football market changed massively during COVID. So your ability to even sell a player from March onwards last year, and in terms of football clubs planning their financials for a year, even the bigger clubs, changed massively. So even if, Celtic may have taken the view, and I'm being charitable here, that actually they would have been open to Edouard selling Edouard, but actually because of the conditions in the market, no one was willing to or able to pay the price that Celtic wanted. But listen, we've been burnt with this before. We saw what happened with Boyata. We saw what happened with Dembele. what the alarm bells for me on at any level within any organisation is: are you not learning from your mistakes? And if you're not learning from your mistakes, I'm sorry, that's stupidity, right? It's just incompetence. So I completely with you on that. To me, I would rather that we'd got rid of all the players that wanted to leave last summer, even at risk, and brought in hungrier players that wanted to be there and wanted to play, because football is a game of margins, and one of the things I've learned by gathering all these stats is the difference between a Van Dijk and a Stephen Hendry is a Jack Henry. Sorry, Stephen Hendry. A Jack Henry is obviously massive to our eyes, but in actual statistical measures of different defensive actions and what have you, it's a relatively small percent. It really is. It's not as big as you'd like to think. And if you've got players who mentally are not fully committed to the cause for whatever reason, Edouard can be as effective as a Jack Aitchison if his head's not in the right place. Because I'm sorry, but ability isn't commensurate with wage packet. The margins are much smaller than that. So you've got to have people. And I think Postecoglou is a guy who, not only is he a football manager, he's a manager in the widest sense, and a leader. He's a leader of people, and he understands people. And so I think he's invested a lot of his time in education and understanding people and organisations and culture, and he lectures on this occasionally. And I think he fundamentally understands that if you've got people in your team that are not pulling with you, it doesn't matter that they're on 100 grand and scored 30 goals last season. You're actually better in some cases putting in the 20-year-old who's going to run about all day, because actually you might get just as much. So I think if Celtic haven't grasped that by now, then we are beyond hope, I think.
That is very interesting, as is every episode with Alan Morrison on A Celtic State of Mind. Alan, tell us where we can find your site and also the website, the podcast rather, that you contribute to regularly.
Yeah, so Celtic by Numbers. I'm not terribly prolific on the article writing at the moment, but I'm hoping that as my situation changes, that will change over the next year or so. But Celtic by Numbers on Twitter. The Huddle Breakdown I do with Enda Call and Duco James, that many people will know from Twitter as well. We're all little tarts. We'll appear for anyone that asks us, so we're not precious. If you want someone to drone on about numbers, we're always open to a good chat. So we're not precious about that. But yeah, Huddle Breakdown. We try and knock out one a week in terms of looking at the previous game and looking ahead to the next game, and some of the performance numbers that sit underneath that. And hopefully, people find it entertaining.
I find it fascinating. Alan, thank you very much for joining us on this impromptu Saturday bulletin. And I look forward to having you back on again sometime, Alan. Thank you very much for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Thanks, Paul.